Cedar Creek Medical's third-floor ICU smells like antiseptic and floor polish under fluorescent lights that hum like dying wasps. Natalie Hayes moves between beds in navy scrubs, her movements efficient and silent, hand steady as a surgical laser despite the tremor that other nurses blame on too much coffee. She keeps a pair of worn combat boots at the bottom of her locker, buried under spare socks and protein bars, never mentioning why the laces are stained dark or why 3 eyelets are missing on the left boot. A faint scar runs from her right collarbone into her scrub collar, a pale line that tells a story nobody asks about anymore. She's been at Cedar Creek for 8 months. 8 months of keeping her head down, of being just another pair of scrubs in a sea of them, of nodding when she's spoken to and volunteering for the night shifts that other nurses avoid. Her nursing license says Natalie Hayes. It's the only legal document she has left. The other one, the one that would tell you her real rank, sits in a sealed folder somewhere in a Pentagon basement under a national security directive that still has her signature on it, dated 17 years ago, the day they told her to disappear. The ICU corridor stretches quiet at 7:43 a.m. on a Tuesday. Natalie checks the 4 on bed 7, a 52-year-old veteran named Marcus who came in 3 days ago with chest pain. His chart reads stable. His vitals agree. She adjusts his oxygen to 2 liters and makes a note in his file, clean, efficient, the handwriting of someone who knows that documentation saves lives and lies destroy them. Her badge hangs from a breakaway lanyard next to her stethoscope, identifying her only as N. Hayes, RN. Dr. Caldwell arrives for morning rounds at 8:41 a.m. sharp. He's the senior attending, a man built from institutional politicking and board connections, the kind of doctor who arrives first and leaves last so everyone notices, who throws around his credentials like a weapon he's still getting used to. He walks past Natalie twice without acknowledgement, charts in hand, speaking to the residents trailing behind him like he's conducting a symphony only he can hear. Then he stops. His head turns. He looks at her the way a man looks at something he already dislikes. "You're the new one, Hayes." She turns from the monitor. Her eyes meet his for exactly 1 second. "Yes, doctor." His gaze scans her name tag, her scrubs, her flat expression, cataloging details like a threat assessment. Something in his face shifts. A tightness around the mouth. The look of a man who doesn't like being ignored, who's built a career on being the smartest person in every room and doesn't tolerate quiet competence that doesn't defer to him first. "How long have you been nursing?" She knows this question. It's not a question. It's a setup. 12 years, doctor. He makes a sound that isn't quite a laugh. More like air escaping from something pressurized. 12 years. And you still haven't figured out that a stethoscope doesn't make you a doctor. He turns to the resident next to him, a nervous young man named Thompson who flinches when Caldwell moves. "You see this? This is what happens when we let people with incomplete educations into critical care. They start thinking they understand medicine." Natalie returns to the monitor without response. Her jaw tightens once. Just once. The only visible reaction the room gets. Caldwell watches her for 2 more seconds. His hands flex like he's not used to being dismissed. He doesn't like it. She can tell he doesn't like it. Then he moves on to the next patient, speaking louder now, his voice sharper, like he's performing for an audience that isn't there. The morning continues. Natalie works her section of the ICU with the kind of invisible precision that gets people better, checking lines, monitoring outputs, noticing the small changes that precede big problems. She talks to her patients. She listens when they talk back. She doesn't interrupt their stories to discuss her credentials. At 11:33 a.m., she's walking from bed for back toward the medication station when she passes Caldwell in the hallway outside the break room. He's on his phone. His voice carries the tone of someone calling people who owe him favors, asking them to listen. 3 board members, he says to whoever is on the other end. "I want 3 calls made this week. Just questions. Questions about credential verification. That's all." He laughs. A short, sharp sound like breaking glass. He doesn't see her until she's already passing. But she hears every word. The break room is empty when she walks in at 12:15 p.m. Natalie sets her lunch tray down at a corner table, turkey sandwich, apple, water, nothing that requires her attention to eat. She eats alone most days. The other nurses stop trying after about a week. They sense something in her that doesn't want company, and they're not wrong. She's 4 minutes into her 30-minute break when the door opens. It's Dr. Caldwell. He's not eating. He's not getting coffee. He walks directly to her table with the stride of a man who owns the space he moves through. A group of 3 nurses watching from the other side of the room goes very still. You know what's wrong with nursing these days. He's not asking her. He's announcing to the room. To the audience. Everyone thinks their 2-year degree makes them think like a doctor. Civilian nursing requires actual education, not just bandaging soldiers. He's staring at her when he says it. Making sure she understands that he knows she's not actually civilian. Making sure she understands that he's warning her. I'd bet money you won't last a week. The real work? It'll break you. He leaves before she answers, not because he wants to hear her response but because he doesn't need to. He's already moved on to the next performance. Natalie sets down her sandwich. She breathes once. Just one breath, long and steady, the kind of breath that comes from having already survived worse. She takes another bite of her sandwich. She chews. She swallows. She picks up her water and drinks it. The 3 nurses watching her don't look away fast enough. They saw the clench in her jaw. They're trying to read whether she's about to cry or break something. They don't see the tremor beneath her skin because there isn't one. There's only a woman eating her lunch in a corner of a hospital break room, her face a perfect mask of professional calm, the kind of calm that comes from having already walked through Tikrit's burning streets. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came at 1:33 p.m. when she was walking back from checking on bed 5. She was carrying her lunch tray toward the kitchen, passing Caldwell in the cafeteria near the salad bar where the afternoon crowd picks at their food. He was talking to a surgical resident, his back to her. She was already past him when his elbow moved. It wasn't an accident. The tray went to the floor. The sandwich scattered. The apple rolled. The plastic cup splashed water across the tile in a spreading stain like a crime scene. 3 people turned to look. Caldwell turned last, eyes bright with the satisfaction of a man who'd just made his point physical. He looked at the mess. Then he looked at her. Clumsy, he said. He picked up a patient chart from the nearby counter and threw it at her feet. The pages scattered. Some slid under the refrigerator. Others landed in the water from her cup, the ink starting to run. Pick that up, sweetheart. The cafeteria went quiet. 7 people stopped what they were doing. The overhead speakers crackled with a code called somewhere in the building, but in this moment, in this small square of linoleum and fluorescent light, there was nothing but the sound of water dripping and Caldwell's breathing and the absolute absence of any other sound. Natalie set her empty tray down on the counter. She bent down. Her movements were smooth and measured, the way someone moves when they've been trained to move like that, when their body knows the difference between civilian reactions and the practiced control of someone who's survived interrogation briefings. She gathered the scattered chart papers with steady hands. She picked up the wet ones carefully, trying not to tear them. A page with a patient's MRI results. Another with medication notes. One that was already starting to bleed. She picked up every page. She stood up. She held the damp chart in both hands, dripping water onto her scrubs. She looked at Caldwell exactly once, and in that look was something he didn't expect. Not anger. Not fear. Just the flat assessment of someone calculating whether this man was worth the response. He blinked first. She walked back to her rounds as if he'd never spoken. As if the cafeteria wasn't watching. As if the water hadn't soaked into her shoes. As if the chart wasn't falling apart in her hands. She returned the damaged pages to the file room and made notes about the water damage in the electronic record. She didn't mention Caldwell's name. She didn't file a complaint. She just kept working. At 2:13 p.m., she was performing a routine bedside procedure on the Marine corporal in bed 3, a young man named Jensen with shrapnel wounds and a recovery curve that surprised most of her co-workers. She was closing a sutured laceration on his shoulder that had opened slightly during physical therapy, and her hands were moving with the kind of precision that doesn't come from a textbook. Jensen's eyes were tracking her movements. Then they went wide. "That's a couple running stitch," he whispered. His voice was barely audible, barely more than a breath, but in that small room it carried the weight of recognition. "You're not just a nurse. You're a combat medic." The suture went still in her hands. Not frozen. Not trembling. Just still. She didn't answer. She finished the stitch, tied it off with the kind of knot that only gets learned in field medicine, and applied the dressing without response. Her hands completed the muscle memory while her mind ran through the calculus of how badly this single moment had just compromised everything. Jensen watched her without blinking. "Tikrit?" he asked. She was already putting away the instruments. Her voice came out level. Deferential. The voice of a nurse, not a master chief. "I should let you rest, Marine." But the damage was done. The camouflage had cracked. The quiet nurse with the worn combat boots and the scar hidden under her scrub collar wasn't quite invisible anymore. In 3 days, she had no idea what was about to walk through those hospital doors. She had no idea that her past was about to arrive in a uniform she hadn't worn in 17 years. All she knew was that Dr. Caldwell had been right about one thing: something was about to break. And it wasn't going to be her. The cardiac monitor's scream shattered the 2:33 a.m. silence like a gunshot through glass. Bed 7. The veteran's chest rose and fell in shallow gasps. His jugular veins distended like ropes pulling tight against his neck. Dr. Caldwell arrived 6 minutes later, still buttoning his shirt, and the moment he saw the monitor readings his composure fractured into pure panic. Blood pressure 60/40. Dropping. The muffled heart sounds told the whole story, fluid filling the pericardial sac, squeezing the heart like a fist closing around water. "Cardiac tamponade," Caldwell barked. "Get surgery down here. Now." The charge nurse picked up the phone. 12 minutes minimum. "They're finishing a trauma case upstairs." Caldwell's hands hovered over the patient's exposed chest. He didn't touch anything. He stood there like a man who'd memorized all the right words but forgotten what to do with them. The monitor beeped. Once. Twice. Pressure bottoming out at 50/30. The patient's lips were turning blue. His eyes were rolling back. Natalie had been checking the blood bank 3 rooms down. She heard the alarm before the call came through. She moved without thinking, habit older than memory, muscle firing faster than judgment. She was already inside bed 7 when Caldwell was still staring at the monitor like it might answer him. "We need to decompress now," she said. Her voice didn't shake. "Or he dies in the next 4 minutes." Caldwell spun toward her, his face going the color of old beef. "You do not make clinical decisions, nurse. Step back." She was already pulling the 18-gauge spinal needle from the crash cart. The plastic case crackled as she ripped it open. Her hands moved like they'd done this 1,000 times before, which they had, in places where the nearest surgeon was 8 hours away by convoy and people died in the time it took to ask permission. "Doctor," she said, prepping the subxiphoid area with betadine swabs that left dark amber streaks across his skin, "he has 4 minutes maximum. I will have your license if you touch that patient." She didn't respond. She didn't pause. She didn't even look at him. The needle advanced at a 30-degree angle toward the left shoulder, guided by feel and anatomical memory and the kind of certainty that came from having already chosen between protocol and living people. The resistance gave way. The needle slipped through the pericardial membrane. She withdrew the syringe plunger. Dark blood filled the chamber. 60 milliliters. 70. The pressure from inside the sac released like air hissing from a punctured tire. The monitor beeped. Once. The rhythm stabilized. The sound of it, that single solid beep, was louder than thunder. The patient gasped. Color flooded back into his face like someone had turned up the volume on his life. His oxygen saturation climbed from 68 to 82 to 91. His blood pressure rose to 90/60. Sinus rhythm. The man's eyes focused. He was alive. The room held its breath for 3 seconds. Caldwell's face went white. Then red. Then something worse than either, a shade of purple that came from a place deeper than anger. His jaw worked without words. His fists clenched and unclenched at his sides. "You," he said finally, his voice tight and thin like a wire about to snap, "just assaulted a patient against direct orders." Natalie was already disposing of the needle in the biohazard container, her movement smooth and practiced and absolutely calm. She didn't look at him. She didn't acknowledge the words. She simply continued working, checking the monitor, noting the readings, verifying the patient's oxygen saturation was climbing steadily upward toward normal. Caldwell turned to the charge nurse, whose eyes were wide and locked on Natalie like she'd just watched someone walk on water. "Document everything. Every violation. This nurse is done. Suspended, effective immediately. I don't care if you have to call the administrator at 3 in the morning. She is finished here." The charge nurse didn't move. She was still looking at the patient, at the color in his skin, at the steady rise and fall of his chest, at the monitor showing a perfect sinus rhythm at 96 beats per minute. She was looking at a man who'd been dying 6 seconds earlier. "Call administration," Caldwell repeated, his voice harder now, crystallizing around the edges like something freezing solid. "That is a direct order." The charge nurse picked up the phone. Natalie finished charting the procedure with the same precision she'd used to perform it. The syringe with its 60 milliliters of blood went into the specimen container. The needle went into biohazard. The betadine swabs went into the trash. She documented the time, the procedure, the measurements, Dr. Caldwell's explicit directive not to intervene, and her clinical assessment that the patient would have experienced cardiac arrest within 4 minutes without intervention. The facts. Just the facts. Dry and neutral and absolutely devastating. Caldwell watched her write. His breathing had gone shallow and fast. A vein stood out on his temple, pulsing with each heartbeat. "You knew I was in charge," he said quietly. The quiet was worse than the yelling. Quiet was where the rage lived. "You knew that." She finished writing without responding. She looked at the veteran in bed 7, really looked at him. The man's eyes were tracking movement. His pupils were reactive. His color was good. His blood pressure was holding at 92/58. The fluid around his heart was gone. The pressure was relieved. He was stable. She had about 8 minutes before security arrived. Maybe less. The veteran reached out and grabbed her wrist as she turned to leave. His grip was stronger than she expected, the grip of a man who'd been drowning a moment ago and had just been pulled back onto solid ground. "Thank you," he said. His voice was rough, barely a whisper, but his eyes were clear. "Thank you." She nodded once. "You're going to be fine. Cardiothoracic will be here soon. They'll want to explore the source of the bleeding. Probably a small vessel rupture. But you're stable now. You're going to be fine." He held onto her wrist a moment longer, then let her go. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed their institutional buzz. The monitor beeped its steady rhythm. In the hallway outside bed 7, the night shift continued as if someone hadn't just been standing at the threshold of death. As if someone hadn't just been pulled back. Caldwell was on his phone now, his voice low and urgent, calling the assistant hospital administrator at 2:53 a.m. Natalie could hear him through the doorway, words like reckless, insubordination, gross violation of chain of command, immediate suspension. She clocked out at 3:15 a.m. The suspension letter was waiting on her phone by 3:06 a.m. Effective immediately. Pending investigation into falsified nursing credentials and violation of direct physician orders. Report to Human Resources Monday morning. But that wasn't the worst part. That wasn't the thing that made her finally break. Within 48 hours of pulling 60 milliliters of blood from a dying man's chest, Dr. Caldwell had activated his network like a man with nothing left to lose. He started with phone calls. The kind that didn't come through the hospital switchboard. The kind made from his private office at 6:51 a.m. on Thursday morning, before the sun had burned through Philadelphia's early fog. 3 board members received those calls. Dr. Harrison Chen, who sat on the credentialing committee. Margaret Sutton, the hospital's chief financial officer. And Judge Robert Westbrook, whose daughter worked in administration and whose influence extended into corners of the hospital that had nothing to do with medicine. The conversation was always the same, a carefully modulated voice expressing concern, nothing accusatory, just questions. Honest questions. "I'm troubled by some irregularities in her nursing license verification," Caldwell said to Chen, his tone suggesting he was reluctant to even bring it up. "Her educational background, I've been unable to confirm the usual markers of legitimacy. The credentials are there, yes, but the pathway seems unclear. Possibly fraudulent. I wouldn't want us to be exposed if something's not above board." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Invisible. Deadly. Within 3 hours, every one of those board members had mentioned it to someone else. By noon, the hospital's rumor mill had transformed whispers into certainty. She'd lied on her application. She wasn't qualified. She'd gotten someone killed. None of it was true. All of it was about to destroy her. That same Thursday morning, a woman Natalie had never seen before arrived at Cedar Creek Medical carrying a leather briefcase and the kind of expression that suggested she'd spent a career looking for problems. Her name was Victoria Aldridge, and she represented the Pennsylvania State Board of Nursing's Compliance and Audit Division. She wasn't officially investigating Natalie, not yet, but she had been contracted by the hospital to conduct a comprehensive credentialing review on staff members whose qualifications had been flagged by senior physicians. The charge nurse, a woman named Sandra who'd been kind to Natalie since her first week, pulled her aside during the 7 a.m. shift change. "There's someone in administration asking to see your original license documentation. Your original school records. Everything." Sandra's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, the kind of careful quiet that meant bad news. "They're saying your credentials might be fraudulent, national. Is there something I should know?" Natalie felt her jaw tighten once. Just once. She didn't answer immediately. She simply nodded and continued arranging the patient charts on the morning desk, her hands moving with the same precision they always did, muscle memory and training overriding everything else. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally. Her voice hadn't wavered. It never did. What they didn't know was that those worn combat boots buried in her locker, the ones with sand still embedded in the treads from running through Tikrit's burning streets, represented everything that had taught her how to survive this moment. How to stand motionless while the ground shifted beneath her. How to keep breathing when the walls were closing in. By Thursday afternoon, Human Resources had officially opened a formal investigation. A letter was printed on hospital letterhead and placed in Natalie's personnel file, dated and signed. Investigation into alleged falsified nursing credentials and misrepresentation on employment application. The language was bureaucratic, sanitized, designed to sound neutral. It felt like a blade. The investigation would require interviews with her former employers, none of which existed under her real name, because her real name didn't exist anywhere in the civilian medical system. It would require contact with her nursing school, which she had attended, legitimately, but as a transition from active duty, and the admission records would show a prior military background that the military had officially erased. Every thread Natalie pulled to prove her innocence would unravel the careful architecture of her disappearance. Victoria Aldridge spent Friday morning sitting in a small office adjacent to the medical records room, requesting every chart Natalie had touched in the past 6 months. That meant 347 patient files. That meant her handwriting on admission notes, her assessment of cardiac rhythms, her nursing observations during some of Cedar Creek's most critical cases. All of it could be scrutinized. All of it could be questioned. She would be looking for errors, anything that might suggest Natalie wasn't qualified to be holding a stethoscope, that she wasn't trained enough to be making the calls she'd made, that she was some kind of imposter who'd slipped through the cracks of an overburdened hospital system. What Aldridge would find instead was perfection. Flawless documentation. Assessments that caught deterioration before monitors alerted. Clinical decisions that matched or exceeded textbook protocol. Because Natalie hadn't been trained in a civilian nursing program. She'd been trained by the United States Navy to make decisions under conditions that would make most ER nurses' hands shake so badly they couldn't hold a pen. Every note was precise. Every observation was correct. And every piece of evidence would only create more questions about where someone named Natalie Hayes had actually learned to do her job. By Friday at 2 p.m., the hospital's chief medical officer had been informed of the investigation. Dr. Samuel Morris was a careful man, a man who'd survived 3 decades in medicine by understanding that institutional liability was more important than individual loyalty. At 4 p.m., Natalie received a call from administration. Not a request. Not an invitation. Natalie Hayes, we need you in the chief medical officer's office at 4:30. Bring your employee badge. The voice was HR protocol, the kind of neutral tone used for terminations and suspensions. She knew what was coming before she stepped into the elevator. Muscle memory took over. She changed out of her scrubs in the locker room, moving slowly, deliberately, giving her hand something to do while her mind remained absolutely still. She reached down to the bottom of the locker where the combat boots sat, their leather cracked and faded, the laces still tied from operations that officially never happened. She didn't touch them. She just looked at them for 3 seconds. Then she stood up, closed the locker, and walked toward administration. The chief medical officer's office was on the 3rd floor. The elevator ride felt like 47 minutes compressed into 47 seconds. When the doors opened, she could smell the antiseptic haze that hung in hospital hallways, mixed with the metallic tang of anxiety-induced adrenaline, her own adrenaline, though her breathing remained exactly measured. 2 HR representatives sat across from Dr. Morris, their files already open, their expressions already written. This wasn't a conversation. This was theater, and Natalie was the only character who didn't have a script. "Natalie," Dr. Morris began, and she heard something in his voice that almost sounded like apology, which meant he'd already made his decision. "We've become aware of irregularities in your employment credentials. The hospital has opened a formal investigation into whether your nursing license and educational background were misrepresented during your application process. Until that investigation is complete, you're being suspended from duty without pay, effective immediately. Security will escort you to your locker to retrieve your personal items. You're not to speak with patients or staff. You will not return to the hospital until clearance has been obtained from the Board of Nursing and our legal department." The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Natalie looked at Dr. Morris, then at the 2 HR representatives, then back at Morris. When she spoke, her voice had changed. Not with fear. Not with defensiveness. With something else entirely. Something that suggested the deferential nurse who'd accepted insults and humiliation without flinching had finally stepped aside, and something far more dangerous had taken her place. "I need you to understand something," she said. Her words were still measured, still controlled, but now they carried a different weight. The weight of someone who had nothing left to hide. 3 years ago, I was ordered to disappear. The operation happened in Tikrit, Iraq. It went sideways. The military erased Master Chief Petty Officer Natalie Hayes from every official database, every record, every file. They told me never to surface. They told me if I tried to claim my service, if I tried to use my rank, if I tried to prove who I am, it would endanger ongoing operations. She paused. Breathed once. The nursing license under my real name is the only legal document I have left. The educational background you're questioning is real. The skills you're doubting were trained by the Navy's combat medic program and field-tested in a war zone. Every chart I've touched, every assessment I've made, every decision I've documented, that's all authentic. That's all qualified. And that's all I can prove without burning down a classified operation that's still ongoing. Dr. Morris stared at her. The color had drained from his face. One of the HR representatives actually put her pen down. That's... Morris started. Stopped. That's insane. Natalie reached into her badge holder, removed her employee badge, the one that had given her access to restricted areas, patient files, the trauma bay where she'd just saved a veteran's life, and placed it very deliberately on his desk. The plastic made a soft click against the mahogany. A sound like the closing of a door. A sound like finality. Then she stood up and walked out of the office without waiting for dismissal, without asking permission, without the deference that had defined every interaction with authority since she'd first put on civilian scrubs. The elevator doors opened as if they'd been waiting for her. The walk to her locker took 4 minutes. The retrieval of her personal items took 90 seconds. By 5:15 p.m., she was standing in the parking lot of Cedar Creek Medical, holding nothing but her jacket and her car keys, watching the rain start to fall on Philadelphia like someone had finally opened a faucet they'd been holding closed for 3 years. The rain had stopped by the time she made it to Rose's Diner on Market Street. 3 in the morning. The kind of hour when nobody asks questions, when the fluorescent lights hummed their lonely song and the coffee tasted like regret. Natalie slid into the corner booth, the one with the cracked vinyl seat that faced the window, and ordered black coffee from a waitress whose name tag read June and whose eyes said she'd seen worse than a woman in scrubs with a haunted expression. The cup arrived. Steam rose from it like smoke from something burning far away. Natalie stared at her reflection in the dark window glass. Skeletal. Hollow. The kind of face that belonged to someone who'd already died once and was waiting to find out if she'd die again. The coffee went cold. Outside, a drunk stumbled past, his silhouette distorted by the rain-streaked glass. A taxi honked somewhere 3 blocks away. The city of Philadelphia kept its own hours, indifferent to whether the woman in the corner booth had just lost everything. She'd survived Tikrit. That was the part that cut deepest. Master Chief Petty Officer Natalie Hayes had walked through burning streets at 32 degrees, had pulled for Marines from a Humvee engulfed in flames while bullets punched through the air like angry hornets, had carried a wounded translator, Karim, his name was Karim, for miles through hostile territory with half her left shoulder burning and her sight starting to tunnel from blood loss. That was combat. That was real. That was a thing she could point to and say, I was there. I did that. I saved lives. But Tikrit had rules. The operation was classified. The extraction was unofficial. The Pentagon's solution was simple: erase her. Not kill her. Worse than that. Erase her. Master Chief Petty Officer Natalie Hayes ceased to exist on August 14, 2019, at 11:56 p.m. local time. The military issued her a new name, a new social security number, instructions to find civilian work and never, ever surface. The nursing license was supposed to be her legal anchor to civilian life. Natalie Hayes, RN, licensed by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Clean record. Quiet. Invisible. The waitress refilled her cup without asking. Natalie wrapped her hands around it and felt nothing. She'd survived the erasure once. Spent 3 years learning how to be invisible, how to keep her hands steady and her voice soft and her past locked in a box labeled Never Discuss. She'd become the kind of nurse who passed through a hospital like water, present, useful, utterly unremarkable. The kind of person nobody remembered 10 minutes after she left the room. Then Dr. Caldwell knocked her lunch tray to the floor and called her sweetheart. And then a Marine corporal recognized her stitch work and said her call sign out loud in front of 6 witnesses. And then a man's chest filled with blood at 2:47 in the morning, and her hands remembered what they were trained to do. The pericardiocentesis had been perfect. One motion. 18-gauge needle into the pericardial sac. 60 milliliters of blood withdrawn. The veteran's pressure came back up. His oxygen saturation climbed. Sinus rhythm on the monitor, steady, strong, alive. She'd done everything right. It took Caldwell 48 hours to destroy her. 3 board members. A state auditor. An investigation into falsified credentials. By the time he suspended her, she had nothing. No job. No license pending investigation. No legal identity she could point to and say, "This is me." The drunk outside had moved on. The diner was nearly empty now. Just Natalie, June the waitress, and the ghost of everything she used to be, all of it trapped in the fluorescent hum and the cold coffee and the dark window. She was still sitting there at 5 in the morning when the shift manager came in, nodded at June, and started the breakfast prep in the kitchen. The smell of bacon grease filled the diner. Natalie didn't move. The coffee cup remained untouched, a small monument to surrender. At 6:30, she drove home. At 7:45 a.m., her phone rang. It was the hospital administrator, Dr. Patricia Chen. Her voice was careful, measured, the tone people used with disaster survivors. "Natalie, I need you to come in. We need to talk about what happened. I'm suspended." "I know. Come anyway." "My office." 10 a.m. Natalie hung up without responding. She showered in water that was nearly scalding, dressed in black jeans and a grey button-down that made her look like someone who'd attended a funeral. Which she had. Just not someone else's. The administrator's office was on the 4th floor of Cedar Creek Medical, overlooking the parking lot where Natalie had worked 3 jobs to stay invisible. Dr. Chen sat behind a desk that cost more than Natalie's monthly rent. She gestured to the chair across from her, the one meant for people about to receive bad news. "I've been reviewing your suspension," Dr. Chen said. "And I need to understand something. Your credentials check out. Your nursing license is valid. Your background check is clean. But Dr. Caldwell submitted documentation suggesting your license was fraudulent. He provided emails from state board officials. Correspondence about investigations into your identity." Natalie didn't move. She kept her hands flat on her thighs. "He also," Dr. Chen continued, "filed a complaint that you assaulted a patient by performing an unauthorized procedure. That you violated direct orders from the attending physician. That you acted out of," his phrase, "uncontrolled arrogance and disregard for hospital protocol. The patient was dying. The patient was stabilized by your intervention. I've reviewed the chart 17 times. You performed a pericardiocentesis that was textbook perfect. You saved his life." Dr. Chen leaned back in her chair. She looked tired. "So I called the Pennsylvania State Nursing Board directly. I asked them to verify your credentials in person, not by email. Do you know what they told me?" Natalie's jaw tightened. "Once." The only visible reaction. "They told me that Dr. Caldwell submitted 3 separate requests for credential verification using email accounts that impersonated state officials. They told me he fabricated correspondence. They told me he was attempting to construct a false investigation record." Dr. Chen stood up and walked to the window. "They told me if we hadn't caught it when we did, he would have successfully revoked your license through forged documents. That's a felony, Natalie. That's the end of his career. That's federal charges." The city looked small from here. Philadelphia spread out like something already broken and waiting to be put back together. "But that's not why I called you in," Dr. Chen said. She turned around. "I called you because I need to know the truth. I need to know who you really are, because a man doesn't go that far to destroy someone unless that someone is much more valuable than she appears." Natalie had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her head. She'd imagined it in the diner, in the shower, in the car driving to the hospital. She'd written it out in a journal she kept under her mattress, phrases, explanations, justifications. Ways to protect herself. Ways to keep the secret. But sitting in this office with morning light coming through the window and the sounds of Cedar Creek Medical moving below them, she understood something. There was nowhere left to hide. "My real name is not Natalie Hayes," she said. Her voice didn't waver. "Master Chief Petty Officer is my actual rank. United States Navy. 3 combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. 12 years active duty." Dr. Chen sat back down slowly. "In 2019, I was involved in a classified operation in Tikrit. The operation went sideways. There were complications. I was wounded. The decision was made at the Pentagon level to remove me from official records for my own protection. Witness protection, effectively. The military told me to disappear. To take a new name. To find civilian work. To never surface. Why? Because the people involved in that operation included foreign nationals. Translators. Civilians who cooperated with us. Some of them wanted by hostile governments. My name, my face, my service record, all of it was a liability. The military erased me to protect them." Dr. Chen didn't speak for a long moment. Outside, a helicopter passed overhead. The sound of rotor blades cutting through Philadelphia air. "The nursing license," Natalie continued, "is the only legal document I have under my civilian name. It's the only thing that says I exist in this country as anything other than a ghost." And Dr. Caldwell knew, somehow, he knew, that the credentials couldn't survive scrutiny because the identity itself was fabricated. So he attacked that. He attacked the only proof I have that I'm real. "Natalie, I need you to understand something." Dr. Chen leaned forward. "What you're describing is serious. This involves military agencies. Federal law. I'm going to need to involve our legal team, probably the FBI. I know. And your real identity will have to be verified through official military channels. That will mean disclosure to people who may not want you disclosed. I know. It could expose you. It could expose the people you're trying to protect." Natalie looked out the window at the city she'd lived in for 3 years as a ghost. The parking lot where she'd walked from her car to the hospital every morning before dawn. The street she'd learned to navigate without ever really being present. The life she'd built so carefully that it had become indistinguishable from invisibility. "I survived Tikrit," she said quietly. "I carried a man 4 miles through hostile territory. I pulled Marines out of burning vehicles. I took fire and kept moving. And I came home to disappear. To be erased. To spend the rest of my life being nobody so that other people could be safe." She turned to face Dr. Chen. "But I can't disappear again. Not twice. If I let Caldwell win, if I let him erase me once more, then none of it meant anything. The surgery I performed at 2:47 in the morning. The Marine I saved. The translator I carried through Tikrit. All of it becomes invisible. And I become nothing. Again." Dr. Chen's face was unreadable. She reached for her phone. "What's your real name?" she asked. Natalie took a breath. It felt like stepping off a cliff. It felt like the moment before an explosion. It felt like standing in front of the helicopter that was about to arrive. She told her. Dr. Chen nodded, made a note, and picked up the phone. She dialed a number from memory. "This is Dr. Patricia Chen, administrator of Cedar Creek Medical in Philadelphia. I need to speak with someone from Naval Criminal Investigative Service." She paused. "Tell them I have a Master Chief Petty Officer who's about to come forward. And tell them that one of my physicians is about to be arrested for attempting to fabricate evidence against her." The phone clicked. Someone on the other end, a voice too far away to hear, acknowledged. Dr. Chen hung up and looked at Natalie directly. "They're sending someone. You're going to tell them everything. And then we're going to find out exactly what Dr. Caldwell was trying to do, and why." The door opened. June, from the diner, would have understood this feeling, the feeling of being invisible finally breaking, the fluorescent lights finally seeing you, the coffee finally going warm. The ambulance bay doors burst open at 7:43 a.m. on a Tuesday, and Natalie was already moving toward the stretcher, her hand steady, her eyes cataloguing vitals before the paramedics finished their handoff. Gunshot wound to the abdomen, they said. Robbery outside a corner store on Aramingo Avenue. Massive blood loss en route. The patient's eyes found hers the moment the stretcher wheels locked into place. His face went white. Not from blood loss. From recognition. "Ghost," he whispered, his voice like paper tearing. "You are Ghost." The world stopped. Natalie's hands froze for exactly 1/10 of a second, the only tremor she would ever allow, before muscle memory pulled them forward again. She was already reaching for the trauma shears, already moving him toward imaging, already becoming the nurse again instead of whatever name he'd just called her in a language she hadn't heard spoken to her in 4 years. But the security guard heard it. He was standing 3 feet away, Marcus Webb, 6-year veteran, Fallujah 2007, the kind of man who recognized a military footstep the way dogs recognize a car door opening. His eyes tracked from the patient to Natalie's face to the way her shoulders had shifted into a posture that had nothing to do with civilian medicine. "Master Chief Petty Officer," he said, not loud, just a statement of fact. "That's a Master Chief." The room didn't explode. Worse than that. It crystallized. Every person in that trauma bay, the 2 residents, the anesthesiologist, the surgical tech with the cart of instruments, their hands all slowed like they were moving through water. Heads turned. Eyes locked onto Natalie with the expression of people watching a statue suddenly blink. She didn't acknowledge them. She was already calling out vitals to the surgical team, already holding the line on the patients for, already doing what she'd done 17 times across 3 tours in places that officially didn't exist. But her voice had changed. It had deepened by half an octave. The please had evaporated. What was left sounded like a command. "Type and cross, stat. Get him to OR3. Activate massive transfusion protocol now." No one questioned it. Within the hour, the Marine Brigadier General arrived. Natalie didn't see him come in. She was with the patient in pre-op, her hand on his shoulder while the anesthesia team prepped him, but she felt the shift in air pressure the way you feel a storm moving inland. The kind of presence that made fluorescent lights seem dimmer by comparison. When she turned, he was standing in the doorway in dress blues that looked pressed by time itself, his face the color of granite, a classified file folder thick as a deck of cards held against his chest. "Master Chief Hayes," he said. Not a question. A confirmation. She straightened. Her hand came away from the patient's shoulder. For the first time since Marcus Webb had spoken her rank, she became fully visible. The general turned to address the hospital board members who had assembled like witnesses to an execution. The folder opened. He read aloud, and his voice moved through the room like a tank idling in a garage, steady, unstoppable, lethal in its precision. 3 tours. Tikrit, Ramadi, Sanjin Valley. 17 combat saves under direct fire. Silver Star for pulling for Marines from a burning Humvee while taking enemy fire. 2 Purple Hearts. Record sealed under National Security Directive the 10th of April, 10. He paused. The silence became a wall. Classified status, JSOC asset. Declassified as of this moment for the purposes of correcting the record in this institution. The hospital administrator's face had gone the color of old newsprint. And then the patient gripped her hand. He was still prepped for surgery, still sedated at the edges, but his eyes held hers with the kind of intensity that comes from knowing the person across from you has already died for you once. His voice came out like gravel being dragged across concrete. "She took bullet meant for me. Carried me 4 miles to base. No radio. No support. Just carried me." His grip tightened. He looked at the assembled board members. "Ghost carried me while bleeding. For miles." The room went so quiet you could hear the ventilator wheeze. The arrest happened an hour after the patient went into surgery. FBI agents came through the main entrance in that special way federal law enforcement moves, with the kind of purpose that makes the lobby staff pretend they're not seeing anything. They had a warrant, and the warrant was beautiful in its specificity. Dr. James Caldwell had fabricated evidence of fraudulent nursing credentials. He had forged documents. He had submitted false reports to the board. He had attempted to destroy the career of a decorated military operative by submitting falsified attestations to the nursing licensing board in Harrisburg. They arrested him in his office while he was reviewing charts, and the perp walk, from the third floor down the main stairwell, through the lobby, out the glass doors to the waiting news vans, was captured from 7 different angles by 7 different camera crews. His face, the color of cooked meat. His hands behind his back. His surgical reputation imploding in real time as the story spread like blood through water. By evening, the narrative had crystallized across every platform. Decorated war hero nurse framed by jealous doctor trended on 3 social media sites. Cedar Creek Medical released a statement praising Natalie's extraordinary service and remarkable bravery. His medical license was suspended by the state board. His wife, who'd been photographed leaving their home in King of Prussia with 2 suitcases, filed for divorce 3 days later. The hospital scrubbed his name from their website within 48 hours. Removed his plaques from the lobby. Reassigned his patients. Erased him the way he'd tried to erase her. 6 months passed like water through open hands. The Iraqi translator recovered completely. He sent Natalie a handwritten letter in English that took him 45 minutes to compose, every word deliberate. The Marine corporal from Bed 12 nominated her for the Presidential Citizens Medal. The hospital created a new trauma protocol and named it for her. Natalie was reinstated with back pay, promoted to clinical nurse specialist, and invited to lecture at the University of Pennsylvania's trauma program about crisis management and decision-making under catastrophic pressure. And then the White House called. She stood in the Rose Garden on a Wednesday in June, wearing her Marine dress blues, the uniform she thought she'd never wear again, the one that officially never existed. The wool pressed perfectly. The medals arranged in ascending order of prestige. The boots polished to the kind of shine that comes from ritual and muscle memory. Real boots now. The worn combat boots that had spent 3 years at the bottom of her locker now rested behind glass at the Marine Corps Museum in Quantico, positioned between a Medal of Honor recipient's rifle and a flag from Iwo Jima. The president shook her hand. Flash bulbs popped like small arms fire. He read the citation aloud, for extraordinary courage in service to both military personnel and civilian patients, and pinned the Presidential Citizens Medal above her left breast pocket. His handshake was firm. His eyes held hers for exactly 1 second longer than protocol demanded. The Iraqi translator stood in the front row, crying without shame. The Marine corporal from Bed 12 saluted. That same night, Natalie returned to Cedar Creek Medical for the night shift wearing her normal Navy scrubs, her feet moving through the corridors with the same quiet competence she'd always carried. When a new resident made a critical mistake setting up a central line, poor sterile technique, wrong angle, the kind of mistake that kills people, she didn't humiliate him. She guided his hands with quiet patience. Positioned him. Walked him through it again, correctly this time. In the break room at 2:22 a.m., a younger nurse asked how she'd stayed calm through everything Dr. Caldwell had done. How she hadn't fought back. How she hadn't broken. Natalie poured herself coffee. The cup was warm against her palms. She thought about Tikrit. She thought about Market Street at 3 a.m. She thought about the reflection in a diner window that barely belonged to her anymore. She thought about combat boots and rose gardens and the weight of medals that meant nothing compared to the weight of a man carried 4 miles through desert that wanted him dead. True class is what you do when the lights go out, she said. She raised the cup to her lips. The coffee was still warm. Still hers. Still real. And somewhere in Quantico, combat boots rested behind glass, their leather soft and creased and beautiful, finally home. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or forced to hide who you really are, hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to know that the quietest person in the room might just be the one holding it all together. And comment below, have you ever judged someone only to find out you were dead wrong? Let's talk about it.